Hello, my name is Lucas, and I am the founder and CEO of growth agency Orange Pegs. I'm here today to talk to you about my favorite obsession in life, which is the Hubspot toolset. Specifically, we're going to get into the sales tool, and today's lesson is actually going to be about how to create and populate a template that you build inside of Pandadoc and bring in through the Hubspot integration. It is probably my favorite HubSpot integration, aside from things like Zoom, where I can, set those calls up through my meetings tools, and of course, be able to track those meetings. I think this is probably one of the slicker uses of the HubSpot ecosystem, and I really enjoy it because it actually has really helped shave down my time spent on building new presentations for new prospects, as well as turning those presentations into closed deals. So there's a whole series of things that we're going to talk about today, but specifically we'll start with the template itself, and then we're going to get into how to functionally use this thing. So just a little bit about me before we get started, so you understand the point of view and perspective that I bring to the table. So I started this company 9 years ago in an attempt to help salespeople not have to cold call. And that was my original mission in all of this. I come from B2B sales myself. And if there's one thing I could not stand doing, but I was okay at doing, was picking up the phone and calling people who didn't know who I was. Where I really excelled in my sales career was when I took some of these marketing things into my own hands. Specifically, I remember during the last recession, I was working in staffing, and the challenges I was having on the field, well, everybody was having these challenges, where basically you'd call people and try to get them to, take your temporary employees, but nobody had job openings. And if anything, it was just kind of a troubling conversation for most people, since they just laid off a bunch of staff. And at the same time, they're starting to get busy and work all this major overtime, and still don't have the budget to bring in relief, temporary through the use of temporary employees. And so what I did at that time was I created an Excel spreadsheet calculator. And this calculator, which I will talk about in another lesson, but this calculator was really helpful in starting conversations with business leaders that were desperate for relief in the overtime sense, but didn't have the ability to free up the budget to bring in temporary workers. And so I created this calculator, basically showed a straight line calculation between the amount of overtime that you were already working in your departments and how you could replace that overtime. And then there was a second calculation that showed you the productivity loss and that's associated with sustained overtime. There's lots of studies out there that talk about this issue. And I really brought that to the forefront and said, okay, well, let's talk about what you're really losing by making people work this overtime. So anyway, long story short, this tool became a conversation starter, and it was really a game changer when it came to taking my branch into the black again. So it was kind of an eye opener. I realized my calls couldn't be about the same old pitch. It had to be more consultative in nature than that. Even though I was providing a staffing service, which is really in a lot of ways a very commoditized industry, if you really think about the outcome of staffing. There are a lot of disruptors out there right now, a lot of folks trying to disrupt that. But at the time especially, there was very little that we were doing differently than any of our competitors. But this tool was that big difference maker. So when I think of Pandadoc and I think of, well, how do we incorporate it and create this scalable, repeatable process, or this tool that's going to help us close more deals? And that's how that was my mindset when I went into creating this template. And something else to know about me, I am the most disorganized person you will probably ever meet. And I say that because it's true. And yet when I show you this system, it's a little intense on the amount of organization and things that go into it. But the reality is that as a salesperson, I suck at data entry. I suck at all of the cumbersome manual things that I have to do. And when I suck at something like that, I'll still do it because I still want to close the deal, but I tend to put it off. And there tends to be lots of mistakes in there, not because I'm not trying. It's just that's not my wheelhouse. And that's not what salespeople are necessarily good at. So what HubSpot does really well, that other CRMs don't do well, is it leans into that sales culture, understanding what salespeople are actually like, rather than trying to make everybody good at everything. It's more about, well, let's support you in the things that you're good at, fill in the gaps of the things you're not good at, so you can focus on the things you are good at. So this integration and the way I set up this template, I think does a really good job of embracing my lack of organization, because it prevents things from slipping through the cracks. It makes the whole process super easy and super quick. So let's get started, shall we? Let me go ahead and shrink my face. All right. Now, what you're looking at right now is the inside of Pandadoc. You can see here that I've got all these different portals because I use it for more than sales. I use it for sales presentations. Yes, I also use it for the contracts themselves, but I use it for my hiring letters. I use it for all sorts of different production. We use cases. We do all of our analyses inside of Pandadoc, and there's really clever ways that we have leveraged it. So it makes the whole thing in many ways automated, but really drawing your attention to the things you need to think about more intentionally. So let's get into it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's actually get into it. Now, before I actually get into the Pandadoc itself, I do want to show you the setup that goes into this, because if I just show you the template inside of Pandadoc and not what happens in HubSpot first, it can be a little overwhelming. So let me click on over to HubSpot, and I'm going to show you the inside of a deal. Now, it's important that these Pandadocs are created in the deals, not with the contacts. I think it's important because if you assign it specifically to the contact or tee it up or spin it up through the contact record, then it's going to be associated with the contact record and not the deal. And that can be problematic down the road when you're trying to look at the different iterations or versions, or see just when somebody opens or views or signs the engagement letter. So inside of HubSpot, let me just talk quickly about the setup here. You'll see on the left-hand side, this is where it all happens. So this is where all the magic happens. So when we first get started with a client, we actually always start with an enablement program. An enablement is good for a lot of things. It brings sales to the table. And of course, I'm using B2B in this example because most of what we're talking about is specific to B2B today. So we bring sales team to the table. So the folks who are on the front lines talking to the potential customers. Of course, we bring marketing to the table. We bring any leadership to the table, any stakeholders that are generally going to have interest in how this ultimately ends up going. And in this process, we go through a series of workshops and basically come out with a design schematic for HubSpot. So these fields over here on the left, these are actually all customized, and they're based on these workshops that we put together. So you can see here we have about this deal, about the business, goals, plans and challenges, growth readiness. Now, don't worry about the ATS stuff at the bottom here. This means applicant tracking system. We also use HubSpot as an applicant tracking tool, but that's not what the lesson is about today. I will go ahead and do a lesson for that. If you guys are interested, just comment below, and I will go ahead and put something together. So if you look at about this deal, most of what's in here is for me specifically. You're not actually going to see any of this on the Pandadoc. This is really so I can step in as a salesperson and just understand where something is right when I walk in. I'll walk through a few of these fields. I don't want to get too focused on them though, but there are some interesting fields in here that I think are really interesting, are really valuable to me. So I've got an inside sales guy who does the connect call, and then once he does his pre-qualification, then he tees up a discovery call for me. And the two fields that I always ask him to populate no matter what are these two right here. Challenges to closing the deal and why are we here? So challenges to closing the deal, this is about from the perception of the salesperson, what do they anticipate as being some of the reasons why we might not close this deal? It's not to say that we won't close the deal, but maybe it's something like we're not necessarily talking to the decision maker yet. Maybe they're kind of hung up on a tactical solution versus a strategic solution. Maybe there's a budget issue. Maybe they're being evasive in their answers, and they just want a proposal and they want to fast forward through this entire process. Any sort of red flag that they might pull up during that initial call, I want to see it as an inside sales or an outside sales guy, the one who's actually closing the deal. I want to be able to see that information so I know what I'm walking into. Then, of course, we have the why are we here section, and the why are we here section is also pretty valuable to me because this is the statement that prospect makes to my sales guy where they're saying, yeah, this is what generated this conversation. This is why I'm interested in going through this discovery process with you and potentially working with you guys. So that's a really important thing to know. So if I am walking into one of these meetings for the first time, a discovery meeting, and often my schedule is so packed that I am just going from one meeting to the next, I literally have 30 seconds to get a drink of water, refresh my coffee, and then learn about this business before I pick up the phone and have a thorough and provocative conversation, discovery conversation about the business. And so those 2 lines, plus clicking on their website, taking a quick look, that'll do it for me right there. So, but again, this is all for me. So let me try not to deviate too much. So the ones that I think are really important here for today are the about this business, goals, plans and challenges, and of course, growth readiness, as I mentioned before. Now, the way I set these up, I'm asking questions, and just to give you an idea, when I populate these things, it's during the discovery call. So instead of having this Word document or Google document that I'm copying and pasting over and over, I've taken the questions that I would normally ask during the interview or the discovery process, and I've embedded them here in the sidebar of these deals. And that allows me to follow along in the conversation, and I put them in a specific order because this is how the conversation tends to flow. So I put them in there so basically we can make sure we get all the questions asked, and I fill them out in those boxes on the spot. That isn't to say that I don't necessarily have like a free flow form field going as well, because sometimes people talk fast and it's hard to just kind of bounce between these. But by the time I hang up that phone call and 5 minutes after that, I have all of this populated, or I'll have my inside sales guy who teed up the call, I'll have him take my notes and transcribe it into the left there, if that's the case, if I have to bounce really quickly. But it really is just a 5 to 10 minute process of moving things, if anything at all, because normally I am actually filling this out live. And you can see here, I have important questions about the business itself. What are the goals that you're trying to achieve today? What are the plans that you're thinking about enacting? What are the challenges that you anticipate in all of this, or the challenges that you're currently encountering? And then, of course, how are you set up today? Do you have the pieces in place from a tech perspective, from a resource perspective? And if so, what are those resources and what do those resources and tech look like, so we can figure out how we're going to scope our deal? So all of this is really important, right? And so answering these questions are critical, because what I'm going to do when I show you the template inside of Pandadoc is we have tokens for each of those questions. So what ends up happening when you create the Pandadoc here, it's going to actually pull those fields into that Pandadoc template automatically for me. So let's show you how that gets done. Now, if you see here, I've got all these different folders. I'm going to go into my sales folder here, and I'm going to pull up my Master 2021 Growth Services Draft Proposal. I should probably change it to say 2022. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Boom. Alrighty. So now you can see here, we have all of these tokens listed out. Now this proposal is something that I've used for the last 4 years now, and it has been changed. I shouldn't say 4 years. I think this goes all the way back to the beginning of time for us. So 9 years that we've been using some version of this proposal. And over time, I've been able to figure out the things that are effective with it and the things that aren't effective. It used to actually be a 40 slide deck that I would then bring. I would copy and paste the fields into my Word doc proposal that I turned into a PDF. I eventually got into Pandadoc, and it was still pretty rudimentary for a time. But once I realized how easy it was to program these tokens, forget about it. So you can see here, there's a formula to this. It says client, and then it says company. Now, what that client is referring to is a role that I have set up. So anytime you see this first piece, technically speaking, this word before the period is your bridge into HubSpot. So if you think about it, if there's a role that I have set up for client, that means anything that's associated with the client, as long as I have a field in HubSpot that says company or anything else that comes after client that I've listed off here, then it will pull that from HubSpot. So let me show you what I mean by roles. So I'm going to go up here to the top and click on manage, and you can see we can add roles here. We've got client and we have orange peg sender. So all the role-specific fields are going to either be client or orange peg sender. Now, there's something also really important to understand is that there's also deal fields, right? So we're going to be pulling things directly from the deal because we're creating this from the deal. That's not as necessary to tie here because we're creating it specifically from that deal. It's going to pull all the relevant information from the contacts to fill the client role. And then for me, it'll pull everything for me for the sender role. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So I'm actually going to take you back into HubSpot. And if you go over here to the right where the Pandadoc integration exists, By the way, we already have this integrated. If you don't have this, this is not a lesson about getting it integrated. This is a lesson about the template itself. The integration is actually really simple. You just go up here to the marketplace, click on app, marketplace, find Pandadoc, and install it. Super, super simple. But you can see here, we've got this action item. If I click on action, it says show Pandadoc tokens. And what this is doing is it's showing us from a company level and a deal level, the different tokens that we can use in our templates. And you'll notice that each one of them starts with deal, 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 deal. And you'll also notice that we have all of our custom fields that we've created are listed in here. Some of them are custom fields, some of them are HubSpot defaults. But for example, growth culture, that is ours. Existing personas, that is ours. Estimated budget, that is ours. Growth tech. I mean, you can see how the list goes on. So rather than try to guess at this nomenclature, I would just go into HubSpot, pull up the Pandadoc tokens, and it'll give you the different things you can just literally copy and paste over. One other thing to think about, though, is this is why it's important to have this left-hand sidebar already programmed and all the custom fields already created. So now I've got those tokens, right? And I can just kind of scroll through here and pull the ones that make sense to me. And you can actually see here what the answers are going to be based on this particular deal that we already have set up. So now I'm going to go back into Pandadoc and I'm going to scroll through. So there's a couple of things I want to point out. So you'll see, of course, client company. That's going to be assigned to the client role. This one says issue date. Now, issue date, that doesn't actually tie to anything. And that's something that we input manually. And I actually do that quite a bit. So client first name, that's going to pull from HubSpot. Client company, that'll be HubSpot. Growth.objective, that's something I want my salespeople to type in manually. And there's a reason behind it. There's intent here. And that intent is very simple. Basically, I want people to think about this question and not just spit out the bullet point that they put in their notes, because there is so much depth to what we do. We're consultative in nature. If we get stuck in these patterns of just copying and pasting all the time, that can get us into trouble. We're not thinking, and we're not being intentional enough in our scoping process if we do that. So there are certain places where I do that, but at the same time, I also want to take all the grunt work out of it. So this kind of thing can get all the time and attention, and not all the little I's that need to be dotted and T's need to be crossed. So let me keep going and show you how this goes. So you can see here, client company on this one as well. You can see, here we go. So this is the page where a lot of magic occurs. We have all these right here. So client company, so that's going to pull the contact, the primary contact that's assigned to that role, client, and that's going to pull their company. But then we have all these deal fields: deal growth tech, marketing tech, sales tech, other tech. Then we get down here, available growth team. So you can basically see, if I go back into HubSpot, you start to see where these fields start to come into play. And so to do this, to create a token, it's pretty simple. I mean, you could actually just start by typing that little, what is this called? Well, I don't know what it's called, but you could type that in, and it's automatically going to pull up the tokens that already exist. So you don't have to worry too much about remembering or copying and pasting everything you see from HubSpot. For some reason it doesn't pull up, then of course you can go into HubSpot and get that handled. But yeah, you can basically come in here and you can click on it, and now you've got that personalization token in there. Or you could, like I said, you could just write it out. Maybe you want to do one of these tokens where it's not pulling from HubSpot, but rather just drawing the attention of your salesperson to fill it out. And you would just do fill, and it's not going to pull from any particular person when you do that, but it still works. So that is basically it. Now, there's a few things, like I said, where I'm not intentionally pulling from HubSpot. So, like, for example, these secondary goals, I don't want that populated automatically. I want that to be something that is really thought out by the salesperson before they send this off. Unique plan. Those are things that I want them to think about. And then the challenges we face, I intentionally leave that blank, because this is a chance for them, again, to go through the challenges. I think oftentimes they'll copy and paste it in there, and then start just reading them really thoroughly and making sure that we're elevating the bigger and most important challenges. So there's just a few spots like that, like I mentioned. And then we get into the proposed scope. This is less to do about the HubSpot integration and more just about some of my favorite ways of using this platform. And that is I've created this master template that basically brings in the bulk, or if not all of our programs into a single template here. And so you've got our enablement program, you've got website programs, and you've got our growth program in the basic template. We also have in our content library, we can bring in our agile branding program as well. But what this does is it allows me to look at these programs individually and pull things out. So like we don't do a website every time we bring in a client. We do enablement every time, but it might change slightly depending on the pre-existing resources. So I'm going to go ahead and click delete on the website piece and just focus on growth and enablement and growth. And so you can see here that really kind of helps me move things along. Now, in this particular version, this is a presentation. So I'm actually going through with my prospects after our discovery call, and I'm walking through all these things. So we end up hovering on this page for a few minutes. I make sure to reemphasize the challenges that we face and the goals that we're trying to achieve, just to make sure that I'm not about to show them something that's totally irrelevant because something changed yesterday. But also to give them a chance to just double commit to the challenges and the goals that they're trying to express to us. So that's just a good way to tie them down, tie their experience down to the plan that we put together, I should say. So when we look into the proposed scope, what I'll do is I'll go through and we'll talk about each of these lines. I'll get their feedback. I'll stop after each section. I'll get their feedback. I'll get to the end of the enablement program and say, okay, so tell me about your feedback on this. What do you think? And then I write my notes. And sometimes I'll actually make the changes live. Okay, so it sounds like you've already got a system that's engineered properly. We might have to do a few updates, but we don't need to do this workshop because you guys are pretty skilled and adept when it comes to using HubSpot. So it's really just a matter of updating it properly. So I'll come through here and maybe I'll strike this out during the conversation. But I still keep it there just so when I send this afterwards, they have a record of the things that we talked about. This is another really interesting aspect of this. So I go through the whole plan. I get to the pricing page and the timelines page, and we talk about their resources and contributions. And then, of course, what are the next steps? So I lay out the next steps here. And what I do at the end of this call is I send out this draft proposal. There is no signature page. There is no boilerplate at the bottom. I send out this draft proposal, and I put in a little initial box, and basically ask for their feedback. So any additional feedback, and once they initial this, I know that I should go put the final proposal together. So I get that notification. I come back to the proposal, and then I click on this little plus button, pull from my content library, and I have a section with all the boilerplate already built out. So let me just do a quick search, draft to final, all. And it's going to pop up with that question. Actually, no, I don't want to do this because this is my template, isn't it? Shoot. Let's just click undo. All right. But that's how I get my boilerplate in there. So let me show you now what this looks like in real life. Okay, so let's go back and show you this magic in action. So I'm back in HubSpot. I'm going to go ahead and hit create document. And then, of course, I'm going to pull open my template here. So my Master 22 Growth Services draft proposal. I click on that. I'm just going to put everything assigned to me. Start editing. And then you'll see the magic happen. All right. So right away, you can see this top token was automatically filled out with orange pegs. Issue date, not filled out. That's one of those manual entries that I force my salespeople to do. And then, of course, we get down, and that's just because when we send out this proposal, it could be different from the date that we create it. So I just want to make sure that there's no discrepancies there. Although I could just create a field in HubSpot that said there was specifically issue date, and it would just be deal.issue date, and that would populate directly from HubSpot. But I don't know, it seems like adding an extra unnecessary step. But of course, if we find that we're not sending out proposals on time, that might be a step worth taking. Then if you scroll down, you can see, look, growth objective is also not filled out, but the little manual cumbersome, stuff is. So the things that tend to get caught in when you copy and paste the same template over and over, these are the types of embarrassing mistakes that tend to come through. You put the wrong name, you put the wrong company. But with Pandadoc, that's not a thing that happens here. So the draft proposal, so blah, blah, blah. So then there's the one thing I fill out manually. And then we get to the assumptions page. You can see all of this information is filled out. There are a few things here that don't get filled out. Deal other tech is one of them. And if I go into the HubSpot tools, I look at growth readiness. Let me get this out of the way. You see the problem here. This is good. I'm glad we're doing this live. So I call it deal other tech here in Pandadoc, but the field is other tech, and this in parentheses ATS, integration tools, etc. So that wasn't included in the token. And in order for it to pull from that, it needs to be included. So I'm going to go ahead and make that update once we get off this presentation. But if we keep going here, you can see that the other ones are intentional, right? We've got information pulling directly from HubSpot, which is what we want to see, our goals. The ones that are not filled out, secondary goals, unique plan, and challenges we face, which I had already mentioned before. So that is the beauty of Pandadoc. Look at all of this this work that I just bypassed by having it in a template form. Now I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and get to this page here. So I mentioned before, once we get confirmation from the decision maker that they want to move forward with this, then we go ahead and add the boilerplate. So then it looks like this. We click plus, go to content library, final, all. Now it's going to ask me orange pegs, and say orange pegs for both of those. So it's going to ask me those roles again because I'm adding new content to it. So it's just making sure that we're still that it's populating properly. I would like to see HubSpot or Pandadoc or whoever is in charge of this integration just understand and know that since those roles have already been assigned, to keep it assigned to the same roles, just to prevent any challenges or data entry errors. But you can see here that it brings in all this other information. So we've got information about our company. There are questions in the boilerplate here. So what this is telling me is that certain things like street address, city, state, and postal code are not connected to the contact record. So if I see this happen too many times, what I might end up doing is going back and saying, well, let's pull this from the company record instead of the contact record, because that tends to have that information. Of course, we get to the signature pages, and those are all populated as well. So just like that, and then I can just come in here and delete the next steps page, and we're ready to go. So it's that simple. I went from presentation to final proposal in just a few short clicks. So again, I'm just saving a ton of time on the types of tasks that drive me nuts as a business owner. Well, as a salesperson, I should say, but as a business owner, watching their salespeople waste their time, this is the kind of thing that just brings me so much joy at the end of the day. So that is it for the lesson today. Hopefully you learned some valuable information about how to leverage Pandadoc and create those templates so you can shorten the sales cycle, shorten the amount of time that it takes to close deals. We'll set up these proposals and get them out so that the time and energy can be focused on to actually intentionally thinking about the program you're going to implement, not just making sure all the boxes are checked. Thank you so much, and happy selling.